Hello and happy Thursday. If you have ever stood in a grocery aisle feeling overwhelmed by choices and costs, maybe you've asked yourself, does it really matter what we eat? So today I'm finishing up the Four Pillar series by answering that question and unpacking God's design for nutritional stewardship. So we are on now the fourth pillar of health stewardship, and I've been walking through from my framework on how to be good stewards of our health and what that involves. So, so we have gone over, we started out talking about the why, and I will link in the description to the image that I'm referring to because I will try it again one day, but I know the last couple of times I tried to share my screen, you wound up with you guys just seeing a blank black screen, and so that's not really helpful. So I'll put a link if you would like to look at the image. Um, it's just a little simple image with four pillars standing on a foundation, and there's a roof on the pillars. So we started out talking about the roof, which is basically why. Why does it matter how well we take care of our health? How many toxins that we are coming in contact with, how we're thinking, how we're eating, why does all that even matter? Because of our purpose and why we're here. So we talked about that. And I can put links to these videos, past live streams down in the description below. We've talked about the mindset and a little bit about why when I originally created the um, the graphic, I didn't really feel like it mattered what order the pillars went in. And then I walked through a series on depression, and it seemed to just kind of emerge that as you're attempting to come out of something really difficult like depression or some kind of serious illness or whatever, to start to begin to improve your health stewardship from wherever you are, that it there was a certain order to walk through that, and starting with your faith, the foundation that all of it is standing on, because our very main purpose of why God put us here was to know and worship him. And then everything else flows from that, including our purpose and why we want to take care of the bodies that he's given us to do our life in, right? So we start with the foundation of faith, and then our mindset. So I have the mindset pillar. I added a little plug to that. And so it's plugged into the faith. It's plugged into that relationship with God, our creator, our Lord, and our Savior, right? And then there's a cord going from there that goes across all of the other pillars. We started with mindset, and then we looked at body care. So once you've begun to work on your mindset and reframing how you're thinking, catching your negative thought patterns, all of that, then to just get up and begin to move, begin to go outside, reconnect with this world that we are created as a part of, to be a part of. So we need to get outside. We need the sunshine. We need the fresh air. We need to hear the sounds of the birds and all of that sort of thing. So that's the body care pillar, getting enough sleep, things like that. And then, of course, last week we talked about the toxins and mainly the next step. So walking through, you start with your mindset, redirecting, what's that? Renewing your mind, getting up, beginning to move, get outside, get some sunshine, then start to read ingredients on things in your pantry. And so today we're taking that next step after we read the ingredients and start to be aware of what kinds of things are making up the bulk of our diet, and are those helping us or hindering us in our health stewardship. So that is where we are today on that last pillar, the nutrition pillar, because that really is that seems that's where a lot of people try to start, and it can be very difficult. There's a lot of mental hurdles to overcome, as well as just what's available to me. How much do I know about this stuff that I'm getting at the grocery store? There's a lot to overcome. So I think we need to walk through these other aspects of our health stewardship and then start working on the nutrition, the foods that we eat. And God made us, and he made this world and put us in it. And he gave us, we're going to look at some of his word here in the book of Genesis. we're going to look at two different passages from Genesis, starting in the very first chapter that covers the acts of creation. We are in verse 29 and 30. This is after he's gone through and made all of the things, and then wrapped it all up by making the people, right? Adam and Eve, and now us. It says in verse 29 of chapter 1, then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you. So he provided in the creation food for our bodies, for us to eat. And you know what? It's not just good food and nourishment for us. It tastes pretty good too. And it's really fun to eat. I don't know about you guys. I kind of like food. And then in verse 30, it says, and to every beast of the earth also, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God said, and it was so. That's how it goes. Because he's God. All right, so we're going to flip over. A lot happens between chapter 1 and chapter 9. Chapter 9 is coming in after the flood with Noah. So it really, after the fall, which comes in Genesis chapter 3, you can read about that, things go downhill pretty quickly. And God did a thing and did the flood and all of that. And you can read about that in chapter 7. It may start in chapter 6. Let's see. Yeah, chapter 6 covers the corruption of mankind, and then chapter 7 would be the flood. And then chapter 8 kind of goes over as the flood subsides and everybody comes back out, everybody that got onto the ark as God commanded. And you can read all that in here in Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8. And so now I'm picking up in chapter 9. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Then he talks about how, I think after the flood, the relationship between the people and the animals changed. There was a shift there. And it talks about that. The terror of you will be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the sky, and so on. And then in verse 3, God says, every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. And I know there are some that would say that we need to be eating as it lays out in Genesis 1. But as we see that there was a shift in a relationship between people and animals. So I think there was a lot of shifts that happened on this earth that we live on after the flood. And so there was probably good reason that God then opened it up to say that we can eat meat for food. And, we have to remember we're living in a fallen world, and there is no such thing as perfection here. And we are just what we are after always, I say this a lot, is to try to understand. We understand and can see God's heart and God's character in this word, and a lot, this word that he gave us and preserved for us over many centuries now. And we can learn a lot about the world that he created and what his intention was for it. We can look at the creation, that this is called special revelation, looking at the Bible that God gave for his people. And then looking out at creation, this world that God made and put us in, that we are a part of, that we can kind of understand a little bit. We can see and understand and learn things about God through that too. This is the most important, but it's also important to look and try to understand within the best of our abilities, God's design. And one way that we can do that, obviously it says all the plants, like the vegetables and the fruit, and also after the flood that he gave us also the animals to eat. And then there is more coming, once God begins to give the law, as he's starting to have a people through which the Messiah, the promised Messiah that actually was initially promised in Genesis chapter 3 when the fall happened, that Messiah, when he begins to kind of bring about the people that Messiah is going to come through, and then he gives them his law, another way to understand God's character and his design and his intention for how to live life in this world. There are more laws and there are some dietary restrictions for those people. And there's a lot of different opinions on that. I have also been reading the Biblio Diet by Jordan Rubin and Dr. Josh Axe. You may have heard of them, and a great book. And they talk about this, how some the clean and the unclean. And there may be some very good reasons, maybe to avoid or limit what God called unclean during that time period. But there is no necessity for our relationship with God to be avoiding those unclean animals at this point in time. But at this point in God's story, in God's history. But there may be some reasons to still, like I said, avoid or limit those. And I'm going to get into the dietary principles here that I follow, that I align with. That would be, and I've talked about this before in other videos. There is a website called westonaprice.org, and this is a booklet that I have from there that they do a lot of research and education on nutrition and diet and other general healthy lifestyle kinds of things. And I will put a link. All the information in this booklet is also available online. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about who Dr. Weston A. Price was. And I like the beginning of this. And I kind of started with this a little bit when I started the video. Are you confused about what to eat? That's why we're here, right? Are we confused about what to eat? There's a lot of conflicting information. And they list some of the different diets. There's always the government recommendations, we'll call them. I think now it's called My Plate. Not too long ago, we had the pyramid. There's lots of different ways. So this is mostly a high carbohydrate, low protein, low fat, that sort of thing. And then you may have heard of the carnivore diet, which is basically just eating meat. There's the paleo diet, ancestral. This is what we're going to talk about. Raw, pasture-raised animal foods, few or no grains, and no processed foods. Then there's raw food diet. So I have a hair on my eyes here. Okay, raw food, vegetarian, vegan, juicing, blood type diet, metabolic typing diet, gluten-free diet, healing diets, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of conflicting information. So how can we simplify it? And I had that here. I think I can remember what it said without going to it. Down to a nutshell, what I would say is, and that is the very first principle in here, here, let me go back and find here we go. What I mean by eating healthy in a nutshell is prioritizing the real, whole, nutrient-dense foods that we just read about that God gave us in his word, the plants and the animals, and minimize the toxic, ultra-processed foods. So that's in a nutshell. So let me tell you a little bit about, see how we're doing here on the time. No, I cannot see oh, here we go, about almost 15 minutes in. So Dr. Price. Dr. Weston A. Price, he was a dentist back in the 1930s. In 1939, he published a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And this book came about after he went around visiting several, see what they called them here, non-industrialized people. At this point in time, kind of the late 30s, there were still these non-industrialized people that were living their traditional cultures and eating and preparing their foods in traditional ways. And it was an interesting time because there were, in these cultures, we were beginning to adopt the industrial Western foods. And he could even compare the difference in the health of the people that were still eating their traditional diets and the people that had started to eat he called him displacing foods of commerce, something like that. And it's very, very interesting. I have a copy of that book. I have begun reading it, haven't finished it yet. So maybe we'll go over that book sometime. So yeah, he describes the diets of healthy, non-industrialized people throughout the world. He studied many groups, and it lists here groups in the Swiss Alps. They ate raw dairy foods like milk, cheese, cream and butter, sourdough, rye bread, some meat, including fat, organ meats, and broth. And then vegetables in the summer months, not year round, because they didn't have vegetables year round. And that was the interesting thing. There were commonalities in the types of food, but because people lived in different parts of the world, exactly what foods they ate and how much of the different types of food would vary. So Swiss Alps, the outer Hebrides of Scotland, Alaska, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, and the South Seas. So kind of a pretty broad range there. And I didn't list out the types of foods for all of these in the interest of time. And so the very first principle in this book here is what I talked about last week when we talked about toxins. Avoid refined and denatured foods. Now, last week, the focus was more on toxic ingredients in those foods. And then we were also talking about toxins coming in other kinds of products that we use and not just food. But there's the additional issue with the ultra-processed foods, what Dr. Price called those displacing foods of commerce, they have more of a focus on the taste and the flavor and less of a focus on the nutrition. And that's really flipped. God gave us all of this food and he made it taste amazing. But the main purpose of the food is to fuel and build and rebuild and repair our bodies. And so we need to kind of keep that in mind when we're choosing the foods that we are choosing. Hello, Anna. Yeah, I waited a little later. It's not quite so early for you as it was last week. But thank you for popping in. And sorry I missed responding to you last week. And I understand if you can't stay on, hopefully you can catch the replay later. So I know you're just getting your day going. And it's afternoon over here in Texas. So yeah, so that is probably the main number one thing. And that is the place to start on this pillar, is to start, like we talked about last week, start looking at the things that you have that you are consuming most often, yourself and your family, in your pantry and in your refrigerator, and start looking at the ingredients and being aware, but then start moving to the nutrition pillar. You're going to start thinking about, okay, so maybe I don't want to get this particular quote unquote food product anymore. What can I replace that with? So that is basically the nutrition pillar. And in past articles I have written, see if I can get this tab to switch over there. Okay, I was going to kind of run through some of the things that I've written about in the past, but I need to pop over there. Here we go. I have on my Substack and then also on this YouTube channel, I've talked about something called an You've probably heard of the 80-20 rule. I don't like to call it a rule. It's more of a tool, and I think of it more as a sliding scale as far as thinking about how strict you want to be with your nutrition and the kinds of foods that you're choosing. And I think a big part of it, a lot of people do the 80-20, try to keep 80%, good whole nutritious foods, and 20% would make a lot of allowances for, eating that birthday cake at the birthday party and stuff like that. And I don't think that that is kind of a anything goes thing. Obviously, if you have any issues, like when you eat wheat or corn, something that I have issues with, that it contributes to inflammation and poor health for you, and you know that your body doesn't respond well to it, doesn't mean you have to include that in that 20%, right? So, and depending on where are you in your health, you may need to move that 80 down the scale a little bit more towards a 90 or 95% if you are in a healing mode or recovery mode for some reason, and make sure you're really prioritizing the high nutrient dense foods. And I'll run through those real quick in here. Come back over where I can see. Let's see if I have them in a list. Nope. Okay. So yeah, so the different principles: avoiding refined and denatured foods, uh, including animal foods, right? And sorry, I should have printed out the list. Emphasizing nutrient dense foods. Now, when you talk about nutrient dense foods, and when you talk about eating healthy, it seems everybody thinks first and foremost about eating salad, eating things like kale. And I think, those are not bad things, right? But there are issues with the state of our bodies in these modern times, and that most of us, I would say, have off balance microbiomes, and might have things like inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, IBS, what have you, different things like that, and all the other kinds of autoimmune diseases, that eating a lot of the raw veggies may not be the best thing for you. So, and there are some more nutrient dense foods than even kale and salad. And you know what they are? Organ meats, animal fats, eggs, raw dairy, shellfish and eggs, and fish eggs. Things like that. Things that are not very common and maybe rather unpopular in our modern culture. And I would challenge anyone that is dealing with health struggles and really having trouble to get to the place you want to be with your health. I would seriously consider adding some of those foods into your diet. And I will talk more in detail about these things. Like if you go, I'll put a link to my Substack and you can see some of my articles from the past. So we're just kind of doing like a flyover today on the nutrition pillar. Lacto-fermented condiments and vegetables. Everyone's familiar with yogurt. I think more people now than in the past are familiar with sauerkraut. Lots of other different lacto-fermented foods. What's great about these foods is they come with, I know my light's a little funky. This always happens to me. Wherever I am, whatever time of day, light gets it gets a little funky. But okay, so lacto-fermented foods, incredibly healing to the body, and these foods help to balance your microbiome. And because they bring in probiotics, and they also help with digestion, things like sauerkraut. Okay, just cabbage by itself has a lot of vitamins and nutrients in it. After it's been fermented into sauerkraut or kimchi, or one of those other variations, 10x the nutrition. Okay, so it's even better for you in that form. So anyway, I could go on. It talks about salt, balancing animals from the land and the sea for the omega-6 and the omega-3 fats. And I know you see a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle when it comes to industrial seed oils, your canola oil, corn oil, soy oil, all of those kinds of things. I have my opinion about them, but I think probably the very biggest issue is how pervasive these oils are across all, especially if you're eating a lot of these ultra processed foods that we just talked about. The very first principle is to reduce those or eliminate those altogether. The more you're eating of those, the more of the omega-6 that you're getting. And if you're not eating things like the organ meats, if you're not eating butter, the fish, things like that, that have more of the omega-3s. So you're getting a whole lot of the omega-6 and little to none of the omega-3s. So that's hugely important to take a look at how much of these kinds of oils am I eating and how much of these foods with more of the omega-3s am I eating, and try to get it more in balance. And let's see, did that tell me in this little booklet? No, I lost the place. So we'll get more into that, what that ratio needs to be. It's generally something like 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. And I remember from when I've written about it and talked about it in the past, that butter is, especially butter from cows that got to live their best life out on pasture, the way cows are supposed to live, it's the ideal ratio of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So there you go. Start eating butter. That's a good place to start. And then there's more about how vegetables and how grains are prepared. This is huge. And yeah, so a lot of different things. And I think the less industrialized we can go with our food and the more closer to how it was created and designed for us to eat it, this is the way we want to go. And I'm coming up on a half an hour, so I'm going to kind of wrap it up. I know I'm pretty sure I did not get through everything on my list here. Yep. Nope, didn't do it. So, so this is just kind of an overview, and I'd love to hear what aspects of nutrition and food you would like to hear more about. Drop that down in the comments below, and yeah, help guide me knowing what I should be talking about and addressing here. And I would, oh, and I had here, this is something I'm cooking later today. It's a roast for my husband and I, and I've been trying to really focus on making things to have more leftovers, so we have some things for lunch and for other meals. And I did a series. I think it was the very first 4 videos that I did when I started this channel. So that means they're probably terrible, but hopefully the information is good and maybe helpful if you are struggling with how to eat healthy, eat more of these good, nutritious foods that God provided for us to eat on a budget in this world that we're living in today. And so I did do, there's a playlist called Eating Healthy on a Budget. So you can check that out and see if there might be some helpful tidbits for you in there. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more about what you would like to kind of talk about here on this channel with me and the rest of our community. What are your challenges? Do you have favorites when it comes to food, things like that? And I invite and would love to hear your questions. Let's see. So yeah, and drop a comment down below. Any questions, any thoughts, and what would be one next step for you that you want to take and say up-leveling your nutrition a little bit for yourself and for your family. So I'm going to say see you later now, because I could keep talking because I like food, and nutrition is probably one of my favorite subjects. But as you can see, I get to rambling and lose my place in my notes, and there we are. So I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. I wish you a great rest of the day. And I want to say, as I say, I think almost every week, to do your best with what you know today. Feel free to ask questions, and know that we can always learn and grow and do better and improve our stewardship. Oh, yes, microbiome is huge for sure. And so, yes, let's do our best, make the best choices we can within what God has provided us and what we know and understand today. And then we got to trust God with the rest. So I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to go in the stream now, and I will see you guys around, and definitely hope to see you next week.